everybody. A great one today, for a change. Political analyst Amy Walter joins me. Amy is the publisher and editor-in-chief for the Cook Political Report, and she's been doing this for 2-3 decades. No one knows the sweep of politics around the country better than Amy, and she has a lot of great insights into what happened in the midterm and on the shit show in the House, and looks into the future to 2024. Now, I usually tape these earlier in the week, so when Amy and I talked, they were just on the third vote in the House. As I record this, it's Friday, January 6th, so by the time you listen to this, things will have changed. I don't know what's going to happen, but whatever it is going to be bad. My guess is that McCarthy will finally get it and will have made so many concessions to the nutcases, including that any one member can call a vote on replacing him at any time, which that's crazy. What we've seen so far, and again, this is Friday, January 6th, what we've seen so far is just how fucked up the Republican Party in this country is. This is a party that doesn't believe in democracy, doesn't believe in doing the work of government. Last year, the Republican National Committee declared that the insurrection on January 6th was legitimate political discourse. 2 years ago, 147 Republicans voted not to certify the election. They won the House back, barely, and this week has been pretty sad. The Republican Party we now have in Congress, they don't want to legislate. They don't want to do the work of government. They want to be on TV and do social media and raise money. When I was finally sworn in July of 2009, I'd come off this long recount. I was the 60th Democrat. A lot of national press wanted to talk to me. My team said to me, don't do that. Just do Minnesota press. And I said, yes, I understand. I just want to put my head down, do the work. Don't talk to the national press. And that's for 2 years, almost entirely. That's what I did. Every once in a while, I had a high profile piece of legislation or something like that. And I would talk to some something other than Minnesota press. Now, a couple months after I got there, President Obama did a speech to a joint session of Congress, like a State of the Union, but it wasn't officially a State of the Union. And at one point, a South Carolina Congressman, Joe Wilson, yells, "You lie," which was pretty shocking and was a big story. So we passed the ACA, unbelievably great accomplishment, and Republicans do nothing but lie about it. There's going to be death panels. They're going to pull the plug on grandma, et cetera, et cetera. So we get clobbered in 2010, in the 2010 elections. And all these Tea Party people are now in Congress, and they just want to blow the place apart. These are the people that John Boehner called legislative terrorists. Now, we in the Senate consider ourselves the saucer that cools the hot tea from the cup or something like that, the cup being the House. And this time we had some new Tea Party people like Rand Paul, and we have this mentorship program in the Senate. I doubt they still have it. And Rand Paul is there, and I'm assigned to Rand Paul. I'm assigned to be his mentor. So we go to lunch, and I said, keep your head down, do the work, only do Kentucky press. And he says, I'm going to be doing Letterman next week. And I said, oh, don't do Letterman. And he did. And it was actually kind of a disaster. So the State of the Union address is coming, and the House is a shit show. So we in the Senate try to make a statement about civility. And instead of the Republicans sitting on one side of the House chamber and the Democrats on the other, which is what we normally do, we're going to pair off. We're going to sit Republican and Democrat with each other. So I'm going to sit with Rand Paul at the State of the Union address. So that night, you gather in the Senate and pair off and walk through the Capitol to the House side. Now, Rand and I are toward the back, and we get to the House and head down the aisle and decide to go to the right. Normally the Republican side, but not today. And we go down this row, and at the end, there's only one seat, and there are no seats left for senators on the right side other than that one seat. So I tell Rand, okay, well, you take this seat, but listen, as your mentor, I'll give you some advice. If the president says something you don't like, yell, "You lie." Well, that was a joke, but Rand says, Joe Wilson raised $2 million in one day. Okay, so I go over to the side and I see a seat between Marco Rubio and John Bozeman of Arkansas, and they invite me to sit down, and I do. And I lean over to Marco and I say, Marco, let me give you some advice. If the president says something you don't like, yell, you lie. Now, Marco has a sense of humor. He laughs. And then he said, Joe Wilson raised $2 million in one day. Then I turn to Bozeman and say, John, let me give you some advice. If the president says something you don't like, yell, you lie. And Bozeman says, Joe Wilson raised $2 million in one day. These Republicans in the House, they don't want to accomplish anything. They don't want to pass legislation. As Amy Walters said, they want to be performance artists. They want to be interrogators and trollers and spend as much time making compromise impossible. They have no agenda. They want to bring Democrats in front of their committees and grill them and create spectacle. If you thought last week was bad, just get ready for a 2-year shit show. All right, let's go to my conversation with Amy Walter. It's a great one, you know, for a change. Have we met?
We did back a million years ago.
Because I see you all the time, of course, doing commentary and on elections, and that's what you do. You've been doing that for the Cook Report for years and years. You run the Cook Report now, right?
Yes, yeah.
Tell the audience what the Cook Report is.
What the Cook Report does. So the Cook Report has actually been around since the 80s. The founder, Charlie Cook, started this back at a time, believe it or not only was there no Twitter or internet, but even the campaign committees and the people who did the work of politics, the day-to-day blocking and tackling on campaigns, it was a pretty small insular world, but there wasn't anybody who was like an honest broker, right? Somebody who was there to be I sort of liken it to Consumer Reports, who's sort of weighing in on, here's the ways these campaigns are being run. Here are the competitive races. Here are the races that could be competitive. Here are some of the trends that we're watching. Here are the specific candidates we're watching. And so for people who are really interested and are in the business of campaign politics more than the policy piece, we don't do policy. Again, we don't take a side. We're nonpartisan. We don't have advertising. We really are looking purely at the candidates, the campaigns, the voters. So
when I say to you, because you run the Cook Report now, that aren't the Republicans nuts?
I can say, I would say, yeah, we've got quite a panoply. And what we're looking at right now with this speaker vote is a party that clearly is in disarray.
Well, I should tell the audience,
yes.
Our listeners, that we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon. As we speak, they're voting for the fourth time?
Yeah, just finished the fourth vote.
Just finished it, and what happened?
Yeah,
I think I know what happened.
It didn't go anywhere. I don't know what the final number was, whether it was more than 20, but it was certainly enough to deny McCarthy.
Okay, well, hopefully by the time we drop this, which is on Sunday, the listener will be way ahead of us and know exactly what happened and how it turned out. You know, everyone came together finally in the Republican Party and are united and going to have a big agenda to get a lot of good things done for the American people.
That's what we're going to know by Sunday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope. But this does not bode well, of course.
It does not.
For this Congress. And you cover the competitive races mainly, right?
That's right. I mean, we have to watch all of them. But as you know very well, there's on the House side, you can maybe get up to 50, but it's usually somewhere in the 30 to 40 seat range. And the Senate, again, as you also know, it really depends on what map we're dealing with in any given election year. So
well, we had a map this year, and in 4 of the 5 battleground states, or states that look like they would determine the balance in the Senate, Trump candidates lost.
Yep.
I heard you on, I think, on Hacks on Tap with Axelrod and Murphy talk about how America is so divided right now. They no longer, in a somewhat red state, elect a conservative Democrat or something like that. None of that ever happens. And that these races were going to be sort of decided by very few people.
Right.
And that's really why, like, the Herschel Walker Warnock race, I think, was so close, is that people are so entrenched.
Yep.
But I wanted to ask you about those voters who obviously just said, I don't believe the election was stolen and we got to stop this. So is that what happened?
I do. I think there's so many different theories of the case. I mean, I think you're right. At a fundamental level, there were more people who said, look, I may not be happy with the status quo right now, but I'm even more unhappy with or scared of what would happen if the alternative came into power. And so that's why you could see, I mean, let me just back up for a minute. Part of what made this past election so interesting, but also challenging for both people like us who are analyzing elections, as well as the people who are doing the polling, both within
I want to ask about the polling.
Yeah. So both within the campaigns and those who are doing outside polling for different institutions, is that, when the president's unpopular, especially when the president's as unpopular as he was in some of these states. I mean, in Georgia, President Biden was 41, 42%. Yep. That is a very difficult thing as an incumbent to overcome that drag. Maybe you can outperform the president 3 or 4 points, but to go 8 or 9 points, boy, that is really tough. But what we also came to understand is that those same people who were unhappy with the president also didn't like Republicans, or certainly didn't like the kind of Republicans that were offered up, whether it was Herschel Walker or Blake Masters in Arizona, as 2 of those examples of battleground states.
And of course, those are all these we're talking about these Trump candidates,
right.
Oz and
in every one of those states. I mean, those were also the states that gave Biden the presidency. It's almost like Republicans looked at the 2020 election and said, boy, let's see, we came up short in the Senate in 2020. The president came up short in 2020 in these battleground states. What should we do? What should we do in 2022? Oh, I know. Let's nominate people exactly like Donald Trump. Right? Let's see if that's really the case. And it's doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome.
Basically, it was these people who are not either Democrats or Republicans, or might even be Republicans, saying, stop it. And I think we're understood that our democracy is sort of at stake. For example, in the battleground states where a Secretary of State race was, these denier candidates lost big, right?
Yeah. And that there's a pool of voters, whether we want to call them independents, whether we want to call them swing voter, whatever we do, or that they're partisans, but they're not really firmly attached to their partisanship, whatever the case. As I said, I think in a normal midterm election, the people who normally turn out and vote are those who are the most energized. And usually they're energized because they're angry, and they're angry with the party that's in power. And so the party in power suffers losses. But what happens if the party in power is unpopular, but the party out of power is just as unpopular, if not in some of these states, even more?
Yes.
And that we found the lesson was, right, the voters have been pretty clear since in fact, I'm going to write about it this week, but talking to somebody who's been arguing since, a Democratic strategist, been arguing since 2018, that the reality is there are more, just as a percent of the voting population, more people who reject Trump and sort of the MAGA-ism than there are of voters who support it. So Donald Trump, when he's on the ballot or when he's in the news or when he's energizing folks, yes, he turns out a lot of new people who hadn't been involved in politics before. But for Democrats, the good news is he turns out a lot more people who probably wouldn't have turned out to vote but for the fact that Trump is there, and they're going to vote against him or against who they see as his proxies.
Well, of course, 18 was a wave election.
Yeah.
And that's standard. The president, especially in their first term, loses, Clinton did, obviously Obama did in 10, Trump in 18. And that was, I think, largely about the ACA. People finally saw what the ACA was. Remember, Trump said he was going to repeal and replace Obamacare, replace it with something terrific. And then when people saw what the Republican plan was, I believe they actually understood finally what the ACA was. And it was a losing issue until
it wasn't.
Until it wasn't. And then it really wasn't. And I think that was a big part of it. And he was unpopular incumbent. And that's what Biden defied. And this is, he's like one of three presidents who defied this since 1934, right?
Yep.
FDR, W, and W was after 9/11, and we're going to war in Iraq.
Biden still, though, failed, or Democrats, to hold the House.
Mm-hmm.
So that is pretty consistent. And we haven't had unified government where one party's in charge of everything succeed for more than 2 years since the 70s.
Yeah, Trump had it
for 2 years.
Obama had it for 2 years.
Exactly. Yeah. And George W. Bush had it from 2002 until, it was his second midterm election where they lost the House and the Senate. So it's really hard to hold on to that. I think the other thing that we learned, Al, is that even look at 2018, look at 2020, the districts that changed hands, the states, both for the governorships, but mostly let's talk about the federal races, the Senate races, and where they ended up. And what you see is a pretty clean pattern, which is in those red states that were red for Trump, they stayed red. In 2018, Republicans picked up seats in the Senate, even though it was a quote unquote bad year, simply because, well, Democrats had to defend a lot of red states, including Florida, but also really deeply red states like North Dakota, et cetera. But even on the House side, Democrats won almost all of their seats came from districts that Hillary Clinton had carried in 2016 or that Trump had barely won in 2016. Now, fast forward to 2022, again, Democrats hold the Senate and actually pick up a seat in the Senate because they won in exactly the same place as Biden did 2 years earlier, with the exception of Wisconsin. That's the only state that Republicans held.
I want to ask you about Wisconsin, and I want to ask you about the polling and money not going to Barnes.
Yeah.
Let me pursue that for a second.
Okay.
Because this article in the New York Times basically said that we all know how difficult it is to poll now. Because how do you call people? you call people on their landlines? Is that what they do? Is that
no? Any credible pollster is doing a combination of cell phone. There are still landline people. Text to web, which means I'm going to text you something that says, "Hey, will you come take this poll online, click this here." And then you have other folks that do panels, right? They basically have a group of people that fit demographic picture of a state or the country. But no, I think the challenge we have with polling, let me just say big, broad picture. The challenge with polling right now is twofold. One, we're expecting political polling to do things it was not designed to do, nor can it do, which is assume a world in which races are going to be decided. Increasingly, the control of House, Senate, and presidency will be decided by 20 or 30,000 votes nationally, right?
Well, that the presidency is decided by that is
Yes.
such it's
right. The last two elections, this House election, Democrats were literally like 10,000 votes away, something like that, from being in the majority right now.
yeah.
Right. And so political polls cannot capture that level of specificity. They absolutely cannot.
This article basically was saying that there was kind of a flood of bogus or somewhat dicey polling, that because the legitimate ones don't do many polls because they're so expensive to do them right. But there were, what is this, Trafalgar and Rasmussen and those kind of, I mean, when I was running, there was always a Rasmussen poll that had me down more than any other poll, or had me up less, or, I could always count on Rasmussen leaning toward Coleman. But because there are so few real polls done with, the kind of methodology that you would consider, and because that is so expensive, that there was a flood of these kind of bogus polls, which kind of showed a red wave, right? Because that's what the thesis of the Times.
That was the thrust of the argument. I
you don't
disagree
agree
with that for the following reasons. Mm-hmm. One, and you know this as well, everybody in politics talks to one another, right? And so to suggest that those of us who cover elections, we're only looking at the Real Clear Politics average or the 538 average and saying, well, boy, the polls are moving. Now we're gonna change our ratings. Is an incorrect understanding of what
maybe
we do.
you, but I mean, people who, voters go and
that's right.
look at it.
Can I put in a pitch then for the Cook Political Report, which is at no point did we say Patty Murray was in danger. We never said, oh boy, the polls are getting really close in Washington state. We're moving Patty Murray. We're moving, right. Who was the other one?
New Hampshire.
Even Maggie Hassan, we kept in lean Dem the whole time. I think it is fair that there was a drumbeat in the last 2 weeks about where this race was headed, where this election was headed. And it was driven as much by Democrats as by Republicans, because Democrats were looking at the same polls that Republicans were. I'm not saying the ones that are on 538 or Trafalgar or whatever those other, their own internal data points were suggesting that, as we all know, in a midterm election, what happens? In a midterm election, the final undecided voters break against the party in power. Right? So if you're tied as an incumbent, or you're a point down as an incumbent going in the last 2 weeks, that's usually a bad sign, because those...
If you're in the party of the president.
The party of the president, the votes break against you at the end. And so that was the assumption, right? Well, it's going to work out the way it always works out, which is, man, we kept this thing really close, but the president isn't getting more popular. The economy's not getting all that much better. And, our voters are going to turn out, but they're not quite as motivated as the other side.
But they were. It turned out that Democratic voters were motivated, and the women and men were motivated by the Dobbs decision.
Yes.
And it's a bigger issue, of course, in states where, the state legislature and the governor could, ban abortion. So in New York, it wasn't a big issue because everyone knew that wouldn't happen in New York. And I think that was unfortunate. But I want to just shift to this, what's going on now in the House and what this bodes for. Do you know the 20 members who are blocking this? I mean, tell me about them.
I mean, I think you have right. You have a mix of people who are both personally dissatisfied with Kevin McCarthy, i.e., they just do not like him and they do not trust him. And so this isn't about horse trading anymore, right? You give me a little bit of this, I give you my vote. This is, we do not like you, we do not trust you, we do not want you to be speaker, period. Everybody had been saying this all throughout the 2022 campaign. The narrower the margin in the House, the harder it is for McCarthy, right? Because there is a big enough anti-McCarthy caucus. Now, in some ways, you'd say, gosh, 19 people, that's not that many people. That many people voted against John Boehner at one point, but it didn't matter because he had a bigger majority.
And John Boehner left,
and then
had to
but
go.
that was a good indication that he was going to have a hard time, right? So they are a mix. It's a mix there, and of people who, I mean, I put sort of Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert in this category of they're performance artists, right?
And that to me is what I kind of am seeing, which is that they don't want to accomplish anything, right? They don't want to pass legislation. They just want to raise money and be kind of celebrities, right?
You want to be a celebrity. And what you see, the role of Congress is basically it's one thing to say, all right, we're the minority party and our job is to be the check on the party in power. Okay, yeah, sure, that's check and balance. I get it. But it's not even to be a check. It is literally to be there as an interrogator, a troller. It is there simply, to spend as much time as possible making compromise impossible. And that the idea is the other side is our enemy. And we only win when they lose. Everything from losing a meme battle to losing because we are bringing folks in front of our committees and grilling them.
Now, and that is what's going to happen. I mean, Jim Jordan as chairman, this is sort of the most belligerent guy I've ever seen in questioning. And this is, I mean, we are going to see the Hunter Biden stuff, right?
Yep.
This is going to hurt them, isn't it? Isn't this going to hurt them for 24?
I mean, I'm trying to put this all together for something bigger later on, but it's just sort of fascinating watching this play out against what's happening in some of the states. So just this week, you've had speakers elections in Ohio and in Pennsylvania. You also had in Wisconsin, Tony Evers, who's reelected Democratic governor of Wisconsin, sworn in with a Republican speaker who said, if we keep following Donald Trump, we're going to lose, right? Like he's saying that. So Republicans, even though they don't like the Democratic governor, also acknowledging maybe working together and not going the Trump way is a better way to work.
And Wisconsin is an example of the most gerrymandered state. And I want to ask you about gerrymandering, but
yeah. And then in Ohio and in Pennsylvania, you have bipartisan coalitions electing speakers there, which I think speaks to this point you're making that if you're going to win, Ohio maybe not as much of the case, but let's say Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia, if you're going to win in those places, the only way you win is by getting enough independent voters who are not attached to who's winning on the partisan fights, right? But who want to see results, who want to see people getting stuff done. I think if your only message going into an election in one of those states is, look at me, I stopped fill in the blank from doing fill in the blank. Aren't I great? That doesn't help me. That didn't help my bottom line. Why should I come out and vote for you? How did that help my family? How did that get my kid a better school or make my street safer or whatever it is?
Now that is in a purple district. The gerrymandering I was talking about in Wisconsin it's almost impossible for the way they gerrymandered this. In 2010, we had the census.
Yeah.
And Republicans just did this map that made it impossible for them not to win. And I think that Democrats would have to get like 10% more votes than Republicans to get even. Isn't it? There's something like that?
Well, at the state, I don't know the state legislative map as well, but that's my understanding. I mean, I think at the federal level in some of these places, like Wisconsin's a big challenge for Democrats, in part because it's a state that has 2 population centers and the rest is small town and rural. And even if you could draw the best map possible for Democrats, it's hard to get enough of your voters. They're not spread out enough. But I do think where gerrymandering becomes a bigger issue is, as you said, at the state legislative level. If you are, with the states doing more and more of consequence, obviously abortion is one of those things now. And I think after this last election, we now have more, I have to remember the statistic. This is from NCSL, the Conference of State Legislators. We have more states with veto-proof majorities than ever, and fewer divided government at the state legislative level than ever. So fewer states that have Democratic governor and Republican legislature or whatever. I mean, your state of Minnesota
finally
now has right, is one of those states that went from split to all Dem.
But boy, that isn't the result of gerrymandering. That's the result of Minnesotans didn't like what they saw from the Republican Party this cycle.
Right.
I mean, we barely did it.
So gerrymandering can get you only so far.
It gets you with the state legislative maps. I mean, I think there is a Kennedy School study where they compare Wisconsin as a democracy being equivalent to the Congo or something. I mean, Wisconsin, it's just impossible for Democrats to win there. There is this amazingly partisan gerrymandering, and the Supreme Court won't address that, right?
That's right. And that, we still are waiting on,
which is ridiculous.
The decision in the case,
North Carolina case.
Yes, that's right.
That is the independent state legislature theory or doctrine. The extreme version of that is that state legislature just has control of every election, and that's the basis of it. And the state Supreme Court can't overrule them. Can't
overrule. And it comes to, it started with gerrymandering, right? Which is a state Supreme Court can't tell the legislature that their map is not valid.
Presently, they can, but under this theory, they wouldn't.
Right. Correct.
Okay, I just want to move to the next cycle. Do you think Republicans have kind of learned their lesson and are going you said that the Wisconsin speaker basically said
one
this.
One person saying that. But.
Okay, that's one person. But are they going to do this again? Because Democrats have a bad map, right?
Yep.
Because they have Tester and Sabna.
And they have Arizona again and Ohio.
Yeah.
You can look at it, I guess, a couple of ways. One is, what has made Democrats successful from 2018 onward? The most successful candidates on the Democratic side, whether it's for House, President, or the Senate, have all appealed to independent voters, period. Whether it's Mark Kelly or Joe Biden or that crop of candidates who came in 2018 on the House side, they came in as these sort of practical, normal, right? We're here to kind of get stuff done, not have ideological warfare. That stuff matters, right? It matters on the margins. Now, as you know, part of the ability to get a candidate who fits with independent voters is getting that candidate through a primary, which I think is very hard to do thus far on the Republican side, especially when Donald Trump's in the middle of it. At the same time, when you talk about the map for 2024, I don't know that it matters all that much, the kind of candidate that Republicans put forward in some of these states, because the state itself has such a lean to it.
Well, like Ohio. But Sherrod Brown
is a different, right. Now, he's been able to win even as that state has been moving more and more rightward. And he has a brand. That's what's fun about politics, right? It's that yes, you can do all of the data analysis and look at the whatever regression. I don't know. I don't know how to do all of that, the level math, and say, boy, you just can't win in these places where Biden lost by 30 points or whatever. But you've got some of these people who are still left in the Senate, in the House, who defy the political gravity of their
speaking
district.
of which, Tester has won all of his 3 races very, very closely, right?
Yep. And same with, and Brown has had actually relatively easy by sort of modern standard reelection wins. West Virginia, well, that's a whole other story there.
That is a complicated one. So Manchin is
right.
is vulnerable now.
Yes.
And is that did that switch when he did the Inflation Reduction Act? Did that work against him in West Virginia, or is it just so heavily Republican?
I just think it's so heavily Republican. For as much as Democrats see him as a pain and a thorn, and he's not sufficiently.
Yeah. Well, he's in West Virginia.
But he's from West Virginia.
If he hadn't won, if he wasn't there, we wouldn't. Chuck Schumer wouldn't be majority leader. So
that's right.
Thank God for Joe Manchin.
And he voted for impeachment in a state that I would bet 80% of the people there don't think he should have been that Trump should have been.
There was a pretty good case against Trump. 7 Republicans, which is pretty amazing. People like Cassidy and Sass and those people voted for it. So,
and of course, it's worth noting that most of those people are no longer in the Senate, right?
Well, Cassidy is, but yes, obviously,
and that's what Sass and Toomey, and I mean, you've got Murkowski still there because thanks to ranked choice voting in that state, she couldn't be knocked off in a primary. But yeah, it's getting, there are still those handful of members that can survive against all odds. But boy, it gets harder and harder and especially, a presidential year is even more complicated because of who turns out. And as you said, who's on the top of the ticket is going to matter a lot too.
Okay, let's talk about who's going to be on the top of the ticket for the Republican Party. Is Pence really thinking of running? I guess.
Yes.
Okay, here's the thing. I'm trying to think of who is going to vote for Pence. Part of me thinks it's a null set. That if you like Trump, you hate Pence. And if you hate Trump, you hate Pence.
Right. I mean, there's almost no way. There is this belief in that world, in Pence's world, that there is enough of a constituency for Trump. There's I want Trumpism without the Trump, right? Without the drama, without the chaos, without the lawsuits, without the January 6th. Okay.
Yeah.
But there is where you have somebody like Ron DeSantis, right? He says, I'm Trumpism without all the other baggage.
Mm-hmm.
I just won overwhelmingly in a state that used to be considered a swing state. I've got $200 million in the bank. I've got national media attention. That the Trumpism without the Trump that seems like that slot's filled. Now, as you know, the thing about, especially this early in the cycle, a whole bunch of candidates look great on paper.
Including DeSantis. I mean, you don't know how DeSantis wears.
Correct.
Yeah.
Remember Scott Walker was going to be
Scott Walker is sort of the equivalent. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, because he had won
Everybody
Wisconsin.
loved Scott Walker. He took on the unions.
Yeah,
he was going to rock them, sock them, take it to the Democrats. And then I can't remember how long he lasted, but it wasn't very long. And nobody would have picked, I mean, I was just looking at, as the anniversary of this last week of Barack Obama's win in Iowa at the caucuses. And yet people also forget that was Mike Huckabee who won the caucus that year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which nobody would have picked Mike Huckabee, right? Some guy from Arkansas. He didn't even have a campaign.
Well, there's kind of an evangelical, and that's
No
Pence.
doubt. That's Pence too, right? This idea of he can get evangelicals, but I think the evangelical vote now, this idea that it's a vote that goes to the more religious oriented candidate is incorrect.
Like Trump.
Correct.
I mean, well, that was a brilliant stroke when he said, "I'm going to let the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation pick my Supreme Court justices." That signaled to evangelicals if that happens, we could overturn Roe, and all that was right.
But now Trump's saying, well, that's why we lost this election.
Because states have no exceptions. That's why he said they lost the election, but he really said that because he wants something else to have lost the election other than him.
Yeah. And then I think about, all right, who else there is in the mix?
Well, is Cruz going to run again?
I don't know. I mean, to me, it seems like if I'm thinking about running and I want to see how much of a train wreck is it going to be, because the bigger the train wreck, the better the chance that an unlikely candidate can come out of the field, right?
Well, like Trump, that's the ultimate train wreck, which is what percentage of the Republican Party is just MAGA and is Trump?
I would say he is a solid 35, maybe 40%.
Okay, well, they have winner take all primaries. So unlike Democrats who divide up the delegates.
That's right.
That's right. So, and this is how he won last time, although I would argue he also won because he just took all the oxygen from anybody else by constantly being on CNN doing rallies.
And by being different. I mean, this is his biggest, beyond the other challenges he has, i.e. lawsuits and indictments possibly coming. He's not new anymore. He's not the new flavor. He was fun and different and exciting for a base that was desperate for something new. And he's not that. Ron DeSantis is new and exciting. While he's not different in the sense that he is.
We'll see how exciting he really is.
There you go. And you got to be able to deliver on that day in and day out as a national candidate, which is very different than even being in a big state like Florida.
And frankly, I mean, when Trump did rallies and they were on CNN, I'd watch them because I found them actually really.
You're like, what is he going to say? What?
Well, he could riff. He was like a comedian.
Yep.
No one else
could even come close to that.
Yeah, and in the debate, he'd just say, "You're stupid," or something to the others, and the others were all politicians, and they would, Rubio and Rand Paul was part of that, and Christie. They would basically be doing political talking points, and they just sounded all like each other. But again, if you have a multi-candidate field, it's possible that Trump can get the nomination.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. If he's indicted, okay, if he's indicted and runs, could he get the nomination?
Sure, but I just don't think so. I mean, we've had members of Congress who are indicted run and get nominated and reelected, but
that's in a very, very Republican
very
district.
Small case, and it's for Congress. It's not to be president of the United States. Look, I think that here's part of the challenge that he's had is he went from being someone. Remember, it was basically I'm you, right? Like I'm representing the deplorables and all the people that get picked on and kicked around and people don't take seriously.
He was resentment.
He was resentment, but it was sort of like your grievance is my grievance and we're going to grieve. We're going to do our grievance together. Now it's all about my personal grievance, right? So they're coming after me personally. Mm-hmm. They are attacking me personally. They took away my election. And I don't think that's as appealing as it is when you can connect it to a broader set of issues.
I don't think it is either, but he is going to do this. He's announced and he's going to do this. He's going to run.
Yes.
Okay. And it's a winner take all primaries. And he's got 35 to 40% of the Republican Party, or MAGA.
Yeah. Until he doesn't. But yes, he does right now.
And then if he doesn't get the nomination, what
does he do then?
Does he run as the third party because he's pissed off, which would be great.
I just think he would do so only if he could get, like, I don't know, money from this, right? Just being a third party candidate would be really soul sucking because you're literally setting yourself up just to lose. Yeah. Trying to get into that psyche is really hard for me.
But also, if he's pissed off enough at the Republican who beats him, he just wants to fuck him over or her. That might be.
Yeah. I mean, here's the interesting thing. Like today, if he wanted to, he could have thrown Kevin McCarthy under the bus on the speaker vote, right? He sees that the rebels are able to create drama and he wants to be part of the drama and the change. But instead he comes out and says, okay, it's time to support Kevin. But it's not doing anything. And so maybe I just sort of feel like we're seeing beyond the polls, we're seeing elements of this hold that Trump has had on the party start to slip. It started in November when his candidates lost. Then, as I said, we're seeing at the state legislative level, candidates who affiliated with that wing of the party are losing leadership fights. Now we see Trump coming out for Kevin McCarthy. It's not swaying anybody to change their mind.
Well, look, part of me hopes you're absolutely right. And part of me hopes, but don't want to throw the dice on it.
We've been here. It feels like, okay, how many times have we said, okay, after Access Hollywood, after impeachment?
I thought he was dead when he just said, I like guys who weren't captured.
Or weren't captured. Or where he bumbled the Bible verses, right? Oh, well, evangelicals aren't going to take that seriously. And how are they going to really accept a formerly pro-choice, pro-gay, thrice divorced, right?
Like they didn't care that he obviously was, had sex with people other than his wife. Or I don't know when they found that out. We found that out after the election, right? I guess.
Oh, no, we've known all along. They knew about.
Oh, I mean, we know that from his previous life, but we didn't know about paying off.
When I would talk to evangelicals who didn't vote for him the first time around, it wasn't the Access Hollywood issue. It was they thought that his conservatism on some of these issues, especially abortion, was fake. And that he would come into office promising to do all these things and then he wouldn't. But when he followed through on that, well, there we go. He was a flawed vessel, but he was delivering what they wanted.
Well, and he got a huge percentage.
Right. Of the evangelical vote. They would rather have a non-evangelical, somebody who doesn't live up to the principles of the faith than someone who was incredibly faithful but didn't deliver.
Yep. Well, that's what happened. And that was a master stroke, and we'll find out Biden's running in a couple months or something, or he'll make an announcement.
That sounds right. He doesn't need to make a decision right now.
And look, here's the thing. If you look at Biden, he got stuff done. And he got the recovery package at first, but he got infrastructure done, and Trump didn't get any infrastructure done, which is crazy because we all wanted to do infrastructure. And he got this Inflation Reduction Act. I don't like the name of it, but it spends $350 billion or 70 on addressing climate. And Medicare will be able to negotiate with pharmaceuticals And seniors will have a cap on how much they have to pay for pharmaceuticals. And it taxes profitable corporations. That's huge, all that stuff. Now, are we going to pass anything now? No, probably. But those things will kick in. That's the thing. Is like none of those things.
There's plenty of time for it to kick in, and the CHIPS money going to opening all of these microprocessing plants all over the country, right? That's
doing stuff.
Yeah.
And I think people, and again, you didn't really see it. You don't see all those things I named, especially like pharmaceuticals. Also, we have to make this move to clean energy. We have to address climate change, and God bless them for doing it. I wish it was more. I wish it was a little differently crafted, but I think it's finally we did that. So I think he's got stuff to run on now. I think he's old, but
yeah, this seems to me that those are the two big questions. One, his age, and two, are we in a recession in 2024 or are we not?
Well, you're right.
And so everybody's now like, well, right. Well, experts are saying this and economists expect that. And we don't know until we know. And whether people feel like that there's actually. Now, again, part of the challenge of this last midterm was that it's not that Democrats won because they were perceived as being better. They won because the other side was perceived as being worse.
And I think that will continue to be the case after. We'll see what happens, but I'll do a monologue like I do that on Fridays usually. So by then we may have something that opens this. But it's what a display, and also the unity by the Democrats and the transition from Pelosi to Jeffrey. I mean, the contrast couldn't be starker. And I think that will make a difference. And then are they going to make us go through a crisis when the debt ceiling is hit?
That's right.
So, Amy, thank you.
There you go. Thank you.
This has
been a lot of fun, and we'll find out soon enough.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening. That beautiful music is by Leo Kottke, the great Leo Kottke. I want to thank Peter Ogburn for producing this podcast. We'll talk again next week.